is not like TV, only better.
Television! Teacher! Mother!
Secret lover.
What, that's it? That's your movie?
Well, I said that I had an idea for a movie.
Good afternoon, good evening, and good night. This is, of course, your favorite podcast. It's Screen Watching. We're back again. Folks, calm down. It's going to be okay. We're going to work through the excitement that you're feeling right now together. As we do in this podcast, we talk about the things we've watched on screens. The big screens, the small screens, the mobile screens, the screen at the petrol pump. We are deep diving into some pretty big direct-to-streaming titles this week. We're looking at some movies. On Netflix, there's a look. Is this film going to bring back the R-rated teen comedy? It's called Incoming. I'll have the answer for you. Jackpot. It was last week's big release over on the Amazon Prime. What else have we been watching? Good question. A whole bunch of stuff. Simon's going to talk about the film which stars some of cinema's biggest names, and you've probably never heard of this film. It's called The Union. It's on Netflix. Also, The Killer. For years and years and years, I grew up being told about this amazing action film from John Woo starring Chow Yun-fat. Apparently, it came out in 1989 and it's amazing. I've never seen it, but I thought, you know what? It's 2024. I'll just watch the remake, also directed inexplicably by John Woo. I haven't gotten to it yet, but Simon has. He's going to tell us all about it. I've got some thoughts on the Presumed Innocent finale. I've got some very big thoughts on the final episode ever of Evil, if it is the final episode ever, to be continued. There's the Democratic National Convention that took place. We're going to talk about that for a bit. Homicide: Life on the Street came back in terms of streaming. Big show, and I haven't even mentioned my thoughts on Alien Romulus yet, so we're going to shove those in as well. We've got an intermission. We're going to look at the death of Phil Donahue and the death of the TV talk show. Also, folks, this would not be a screen watching podcast unless we did some birthday quiz, we did some This Week in History. Folks, we're squeezing a lot into the next 23 minutes of podcast. Yeah. Simon Foster, hello.
How about an introduction? I'm sitting here waiting for a bit of an end point. And you're right, it is a very, very full podcast. Dan Barrett, hello, screen watchers everywhere. As we record this, news has broken that a gentleman, and I do want to get his moniker right because it is quite a great name, Eddie Egan, is the man who is responsible for apparently the megalopolis trailer quotes, the fake quotes that have been all over the entertainment industry this week, diminished by its artsiness, Pauline Kael of The New Yorker apparently said about The Godfather. No, she didn't. She loved The Godfather. So I thought it would be interesting. You're clearly aware of what's gone on this week, Dan Barrett.
Yeah, look, for those who've come in late, basically there's this movie coming out called Megalopolis by Francis Ford Coppola. All the advanced buzz on this thing is that it is a wild, wacky film that's maybe not particularly very good. However, the advertising behind it, they decided to launch a trailer this week that was filled with all these quotes from like famous critics from years gone by, like your Pauline Kael's, I'm assuming Andrew Harris was in it.
Saris was there, Liebman was there, Rex Reed,
Yeah, so you got all those, and they were talking about how bad previous Francis Ford Coppola films were and how history will judge Megalopolis a little bit better. And also, plot twist, none of the quotes were real.
None of the quotes were real. Not only were they not real, they were generated by a marketing consultant, the aforementioned Eddie Egan, through AI, through artificial intelligence. Apparently, he typed into ChatGPT, what if speculative reviews of The Godfather that were negative? And that's what came up. So I thought, and I don't often do that, but I thought
please don't.
That it might be fun if, very quickly before the show, I punched into ChatGPT the following: speculative positive and negative reviews from famous critics for the Screen Watching podcast with Dan and Simon. Here's what's come back. You ready for this?
No, I'm not ready.
We have had some very positive reviews, apparently, from The Hollywood Reporter, which say Dan and Simon bring a refreshing dynamic to Screen Watching, delivering a podcast that's both insightful and entertaining.
Have they ever listened?
That's the Hollywood Reporter that apparently said that. Their ability to dissect complex narratives with clarity and humour sets them apart in the crowded podcasting space. Well, I could have written that myself. That's great. Okay, let's go to what Variety said. Also very positive. Dan and Simon's engaging discussions and sharp wit make them a must-listen for anyone interested in film and television. That's That's good. And Entertainment Weekly said each episode feels like a curated must-listen event. Can you imagine if someone said that about us?
I can't, frankly. I'm currently typing into ChatGPT the following question. What might Francis Ford Coppola have said about the Screen Watching podcast?
Let me just get to the negative reviews. And there's 3 of those. The Guardian, your friend and mine, Luke Buckmeister at the Guardian.
What a prick. What a prick.
Such a wanker. Their analysis, while well-intentioned, sometimes lacks depth, leaving more seasoned listeners wanting a more rigorous exploration of the topics.
No, that's fair.
Luke Buckmeister.
Yeah, no, I'm not going to follow that. That's not a
long bow to pull, is it? No. The New York Times, that storied publication, wrote Screen Watching attempts to cover a broad range of films and TV shows, but frequently fall short of delivering substantive commentary. Again, not far off the mark.
That's right. I'll keep my subscription.
And Slate, finally, were particularly damning. They wrote, the show's focus on mainstream content without much exploration of diverse or independent films and series limits its appeal. Well, that's just harsh.
Well, I don't think that's really true, Slate.
No, well, you can't.
I think by going for the mainstream and not the niche, it probably is sort of a broader appeal. But, Slate, you do you. I typed in if Francis Ford Coppola had ever listened to the Screen Watching podcast, what might he have said about it? Anyway, the quote here is that the Screen Watching podcast offers a refreshing and thoughtful perspective on film, providing insights that resonate with anyone who loves the art of cinema. The host's passion for movies and their critical approach remind me of the importance of discussing and dissecting films to truly understand and appreciate the medium. It's the kind of conversation that keeps the spirit of cinema alive. Francis Ford Coppola, we do a lot of TV reviewing here as well. You've clearly never listened to this. Jesus Christ. Jesus.
Thanks, Francis. Thank you, fake Francis. I do appreciate that. I'm going to post that. Actually, the reviews were a little bit longer. They're almost like a 5-line paragraph each one. So I'm going to put that up on our Facebook page a little bit later so everyone can have a read. But it's a vexing question that, this guy's a nut that he think he could get away with fake reviews in this day and age with the internet and all that, what it reveals about truths and lies. But there you go.
You know what?
What's that?
If it hadn't been for those fake quotes, we probably wouldn't be talking about Megalopolis this week, and I can't help but feel that maybe it's a little bit deliberate.
Oh, look, I'm sure that's an element to it as well. I
think that's the only element to it.
I'm keen to see if this Eddie Egan is himself a ChatGPT creation by the people at Lionsgate who are trying to deflect and maybe just throw someone under the bus for their stupid decision. But you're right, we're talking about it.
What's kind of strange is that usually you wouldn't actually talk about the staffers responsible for this kind of thing. So that makes me think there's maybe an extra element to this.
Yeah. Interesting stuff. You know what we should do? We probably should get on with this podcast and try to sort of improve upon what some of those reviews said about us.
It stinks.
Okay, Simon, do you want to kick us off with last week's big movie? It's called Jackpot.
So why are you here? Are you here for, pleasure or pain or...
No, I'm an actress. Great. They're rebooting Barbie. Hi, I'm Katie. Just got back into town and ready to act.
Did you prepare something?
I have something, yeah.
Katie Kim is our new Jackpot winner. Happy hunting, L.A.
I definitely didn't get the part, so there's no need for the death stare.
She's my Jackpot.
What is happening?
Uber for Katie? Did that look as cool as it felt?
I was up against the wall a bit this week in terms of what to review. The only new cinema release is the Channing Tatum film Blink Twice, directed by Zoe Kravitz, which I know little about, and I'll probably get to at some point in the months ahead, but I didn't want to rush out and see it. So I had a look at 2 films this week, both of which claim to be number one on their respective screening platforms. Over on Amazon, we have the Paul Feig-directed film Jackpot. Now, this is, and I was very surprised to find out, actually a futuristic film. This is set maybe 2050, 2060, something like that. And there is a jackpot, a lottery that if you win, you get $100 million. But also, for a 6-hour period, you can be murdered, and the person that murders you collects that jackpot. So it's kind of like The Running Man, but in this one, The Running Man is not played by Arnie, but instead is played by Awkwafina. Awkwafina, yes, that's how you say it. The very funny comedian who is having a tough time as an out-of-work actress. She's just lost her mum back in a Midwest state, doesn't know anything about the jackpot, and quite by accident, she wins the full amount. Suddenly, people are turning on her for no apparent reason. Enter one John Cena going full comedy with this role. He plays a bodyguard who, for 10% of her winnings, promises to protect her for the next 6 hours until sundown. Together they form this bond, this sweet sort of chemistry together. He puts on his big lug action man sort of chops. She does her fast mouth comedy really, really well. And at the helm, Feig seems to really enjoy this kind of action comedy. He's done it before. I think he directed one of a couple of the Melissa McCarthy movies, which are also action comedies. I can't remember if he did Spy, but it's that kind of movie. And they have a good time together, just riffing against each other, getting to know each other. One thing that did stick in my craw a little bit, it is set well in the future, as I mentioned, 2050 or 2060 thereabouts. But a lot of the pop culture gags in it are very much rooted in this moment. There's a Golden Girls reference. There's a Celine Dion reference. There's a whole lot of jokes which are about the vacuousness of modern day California and modern day Los Angeles life. But in 40 years' time, it's not going to be the case. We're not going to be making Celine Dion jokes or Golden Girls jokes. Push that aside.
Can I interrupt for a second?
Yeah.
If you had spoken to me in, let's say, 1995, just after the Golden Girls had finished up, saying in 2024 we'll still be making Golden Girls jokes, I probably would have said no. So, look, I just think maybe let's go and revisit this conversation about 25 years' time.
Well, if we're still doing the podcast then, and God, I hope we are.
We'll still be recording, Simon. We'll still be this episode of the podcast.
The other thing is it features Machine Gun Kelly, that controversial actor, rapper, tattooed dude, who is playing himself, but 30 years from now he's not going to be playing himself. So there's this strange thing that maybe I didn't get, but didn't sort of impact my enjoyment of this as an action comedy. It had a lot of very funny moments. They're a great team together. It's so important to get the chemistry right in these sort of films, and these two really do. Cena can make some terrible films. What was that thing he did recently with Alison Brie, Freelance or something like that? It was just an awful movie. But when he gets it right, he can be very funny. And of course, Awkwafina is with the right material can be great as well. And she's great in this. I really enjoyed Jackpot. It's on Amazon, and definitely worth a look for a couple of hours of cheeky laughs and action.
Well, look, I might give this one a look. I've been meaning to for the last week since it came out.
Are you suggesting I'm late to the reviewing table with this one?
Look, I'll say this. Last week when I talked about this in my newsletter, which came out before the last podcast, I did talk about the fact it was kind of interesting to me that last weekend we had this movie which was basically The Purge meets It Could Happen to You.
That's exactly what it is, yes.
Yeah, starring Awkwafina and John Cena. And the way I framed it was, I said that if in 2018, these films came out, these would be big cinema releases. We'd be talking about that sort of comedy movie with that sort of funny guy that's been cropping up in all those films like Trainwreck and Sisters and all that sort of thing. Awkwafina, I don't think we really knew by that point. We'd be talking about the new action comedy with Mark Wahlberg and Halle Berry playing in the cinemas. There's like an indie film that came out that week, which was about a guy from Argentina that was in love with his mobile phone. We would have been talking about these and it would have been cultural conversations, but they were just things that were sort of dumped onto streaming. And unless you just sort of stumbled across them, I don't know there was really much buzz around any of these productions. It just struck me. It was just we're just 6 years out and we're in an entirely different media landscape.
Oh, entirely different media landscape. You're absolutely right. Which isn't to say these movies aren't going to cinemas. There was The Fall Guy only a couple of months back, which is kind of this to a certain extent.
But think about the budget, though. Like, these films are not to the budget that The Fall Guy was. Like, that film was always...
Well, certainly, I don't know about Jackpot, but The Union, which I'll talk about in a minute, that was That was certainly a fairly big budgeted film, but you're exactly right. The point being, in that interim, when cinemas were shut, and we're going over the whole COVID thing, which we've done a lot on this podcast, but the actual cinema landscape has changed, and watching these at home is a much easier option, certainly from a distribution point of view, than it's ever been before. So you're exactly right. I could have seen this being a major, well, maybe not a major release, but a release that would have filled cinemas for a few weeks.
Well, I mean, even if it hadn't filled cinemas, like maybe it was going to just be a box office turkey and not, do the numbers, which I'm sure it probably would have been the case. It still would have been a bit of a cultural moment in that these stars would have been trotted out to appear on various talk shows and be across social media, but we just don't really talk about movies in the same way that we did.
Yeah, very true. Very true.
And at least in terms of that promotional, sort of mechanism.
What do you have that you can review, Mr. Dan Barrett, if that is your name?
That is not my name, and I'd rather not talk about that in any sort of great specific depth. But I'm going to talk to you about the hot new teen film. It's called Incoming. It's on Netflix right now.
Once that bell rings, we're in high school. You know what that means? Anything is possible.
She's a sophomore, man. It's never gonna happen.
She hasn't met the new me. I don't want to dance around anymore.
Ow!
For a second there, I thought you might have been fucking the door.
Can you leave?
Simon, let me tell you about cinema.
No, do tell.
When I was a younger man in my late teens going into my 20s, there was a number of iconic movies that came out. Movies which I wouldn't say necessarily redefined the medium, but certainly strengthened the medium and really added quite a fair bit to the cultural landscape of which we all occupy.
Let me guess. Wim Wenders' Paris, Texas, maybe? Or Paul Thomas Anderson's Hard Eight? Those sort of films you're talking about?
No, well, I'm talking about in my late teens to my 20s. So, I mean, I would have been barely a 7-year-old when Paris, Texas came out, Simon.
Right.
I'm talking about some of those sort of greats of cinema where, I mean, for example, if we want to think about the cultural addition they made to the landscape, there was that one character who fucked the pie. There was the other movie where the guy was dancing with the girl at the party and she perioded all over his leg. It was some of cinema's greatest moments. Now, as we think about those great films, there's certainly been something lacking from cinema in the last couple of years, and that's been the good laugh out loud comedy. And what better way to bring back to the cinema than to instead release it straight to Netflix with the film called Incoming, which is streaming on Netflix now with a cast of people you've probably never really heard of before, but also with some grown-up appearances by the likes of Caitlin Olsen and also Bobby Cannavale. The premise of the film is this: 4 freshmen in high school get ready for their first high school party. They're preparing themselves for something unfamiliar and terrifying, which is growing up and, getting out into the world. The film is very much there to evoke the spirit of all the high school comedies that we've seen over the years, where there's a party and everyone gets along and, all sorts of wild antics take place. Sure. But I think the film makes a very fundamental mistake pretty early into this by the guys are just too young.
Oh.
So we're watching this.
How old are they meant to be?
Well, that's
high school.
Freshmen in high school. So we're talking about kids who are there's regular jokes in this about whether or not the boys have pubes yet or not.
Oh.
Okay, we're really talking about kids entering high school. And I think when they talk about freshmen in high school, I think it's usually like grade 9, for our equivalent. So I think that's roughly where they're talking about here. But, these are, the kids from Freaks and Geeks, effectively.
Yes. Okay, I'm getting it now. All right.
Yeah.
So they're young. They're kind of young.
They are just too young for something which is such a bawdy comedy. And so when you're watching this, part of the, I'm going to call it thrill, but the engagement that you find with teen comedies like this, and this is going from, classic 80s comedies, which often tend to be a bit more college focused than high school, but, there's certainly a bit of high school.
And usually casting 30-year-olds.
And usually casting 30-year-olds. But with that, you always kind of thought you were looking up. Because, if you were a teenager, you were seeing, actors who were too old to be there. But also, they were always like kids at the end of the high school experience.
Yeah, of course,
Yeah, and that also carried through to those American Pie movies. And if we're talking about Superbad and anything like that, they were kids. I mean, Superbad is quite literally in the last couple of days of high school. And so when you're watching this...
What was that one recently about the 3 little kids, with Ethan Tremblay in it?
Okay, well, I'm getting to that. So...
okay.
If we think about this and we think about the position they're in, okay, it doesn't quite adhere to the teen party because you're like, well, you kids shouldn't really be out this late at night anyway. It's 9 o'clock. You should be still at home in bed. So they try to age up the kids too much, but it doesn't really make sense for that first week of high school. Okay, right. And instead it should feel a bit more like Good Boys, which is the film that you're trying to get to there. Yes. Okay, which is like really about like the innocence of these young boys in a very dirty, foul-mouthed comedy. And that's what made that comedy work. Here, we just got these kids who are just too young for the jokes to land, and it doesn't help by the fact that the jokes aren't really particularly great. There's one or two sort of good gags, and there's one sequence which I thought was kind of a funny conceit, which is you got these two kids, Connor and Eddie, who they aren't going to the party, but instead they decide to have like a big night out by taking Connor's soon-to-be stepfather's Tesla out and puts it in self-driving mode, and so they just kind of go driving around while... behind the seat of the car. Anyway, that's kind of funny. Like, I kind of like that as an idea. In terms of talent, like the kids are kind of fine. I think the standout is the kid playing Eddie, who's the token young African-American kid. It hems very much to that sort of 80s, 90s vibe where there's always one black kid in amongst a bunch of very white people sort of broadly around the place. But like that guy is actually hilarious. And what I think is really fascinating about him is just take a listen to his voice. Like, he sounds like he's a man in his mid-40s. He's got the cadence right. Like, that guy, I think, is going to be hilarious in a couple of years' time, but he's just too young for this movie, and, yeah, none of it really plays as well as it probably should if they were just a little bit older.
What question springs to my mind is that, and I hate the term wokeness or political correctness or anything like that, but you couldn't do American Pie now. You couldn't do most of those 80s comedies now because straight away, do they lean into it in any clever way that allows for that kind of, does it earn its R rating with some challenging stuff that challenges the current young movie?
Okay, so this is the problem, okay, which is that American Pie, you could sort of broadly do now. The only things that would really sort of stop you is it'd be a bit on the nose because I don't think that broadly the world wants to talk about sort of teenage boy sexuality in the way that was maybe sort of popular at the time, and the way that some of the women are treated.
Yeah, but I get your point. Yeah.
Well, particularly like the Nadia character, I think is sort of treated pretty poorly, and that doesn't really hold together that well. But you can still kind of do that sort of a movie and get away with it just with some sort of tweaks. Where this film really falls apart is that it's supposed to be a high school-based sex comedy, but you're dealing with some boys who are barely pubescent, and so it doesn't really lean into the sex very much at all. So the sexual politics of it are not really as front and center as it probably would be if the kids were another 2 to 3 years older. And it just kind of loses a bit of bite as a result. But hey, look, if I was a young kid who's maybe sort of, 13, 14, and I've got like a, night where I'm seeing a movie with a couple of mates, I'd probably have a real good time with this one. But I think for anyone outside of that really young teen demo, you're really going to struggle to find much in this one to really, get much of a kick out of.
It's called Incoming. It's on Netflix. If that little wrap up from our good friend Dan Barrett, one of the most lauded podcasters according to New York Times, then do have a watch of it. It is on this week. Where to next, Dan Barrett?
Look, where to
podcast
next?
Is a fast podcast.
That's what they say. Let's just quickly do some what else have you been watching. Let's just burn through this. Okay, so Simon, quickly, what else have you been watching? And let's start with The Union, because we talked about that.
Okay, so the other big star vehicle on the streaming platforms this week, or maybe last week, is The Union, which is Mark Wahlberg and Halle Berry re-teaming because they've been around each other for a long time, and there's a lovely sequence at the end of the film which shows them as teenagers being buddies. Reteaming in another action comedy adventure. I really needed to purge a lot of the tension in my life over the last couple of days. So what I did was I lent into these sort of junk movies, which I wouldn't normally do because I can get a bit tough on Netflix and their star-driven vehicles because there's been so many really, really bad ones. But I was pleasantly surprised, maybe because I just needed that sort of relief with The Union. It is pure star power doing what they do. It features Marky Mark as a down-on-his-luck construction worker who's sort of stuck in his Newark lifestyle, living with his mum, played very briefly by Lorraine Bracco, which seems odd because they can't be that far apart in their ages, but maybe they are. And he's all of a sudden thrust into this world of super spies and secret agents when Halle Berry who plays Roxanne, returns to basically kidnap him, stick a needle in his neck, and take him away to this J.K. Simmons run intelligence agency that works deeper undercover than the CIA or the FBI, and they get caught up in a globe-hopping adventure. It's stupid to the nth degree. He goes through years and years of training in one montage, and all of a sudden he goes from a steel worker on the east coast of the US to a globe-hopping secret agent super killer. But their chemistry is great. The action sequences are very colourful and quite well made. This is another one where you can switch your brain off and not be reminded that your brain is switched off while you're watching it. Other movies like this just don't overcome their own silliness. This one kind of leans into it and allows the stars to do what stars do best, and that's to bounce off each other really, really well. Plus, there's a nice sort of emotional line through this about not achieving what you set out to achieve in your life, and also realizing sometimes it's not too bad to look backwards as well and have a little bit of nostalgia. So, yeah, I quite enjoyed The Union. Immediately in one eyeball and out the other. It already feels like weeks and weeks ago since I watched it, and it was only yesterday morning, but it's just a movie that I had a good time with.
Okay, well, can we talk about The Killer, which is one of the other big sort of direct-to-streaming films this week?
You mentioned at the top of the show what an influential action movie John Woo's 1989 original is, with Chow Yun-fat as the killer. It was central to my falling in love with movies. I saw it on the big screen. I ended up selling it on video. It features some of the most poetic and beautifully shot action sequences ever, plus it has a really emotional central story. None of that is true of this remake, which stars the very pretty Natalie Emmanuel, who we know from the Fast and the Furious films, and you're going to mention something else that she was big in on television, and I can't remember what it was.
Game of Thrones, Simon. Game of Thrones.
All right, let's go with that.
Jesus.
And in this one, she's playing the role that Chow Yun-fat played. Omar Sy is the French police officer who is sometimes on her side, sometimes not. And there's this convoluted plot line, this storyline that makes no sense whatsoever, that trudges the film down in the middle section. The action sequences are like someone who's trying to copy John Woo. I'm burying the lead here. He directed this. He's remade his own film from all those years ago, and it only shows just how far the art and craft of action filmmaking has fallen in the wrong hands when it really is in the right hands here, but it just doesn't work at all. So at 2 hours and 2 minutes, I was maybe 10 minutes into this film when I said to my lovely wife, I can see this doesn't need to be 2 hours long. It was already straining to hold my interest. And despite a couple of big stunt sequences and some very pretty Paris backdrops, The Killer is a fair dinkum dud.
Look, so I'm just currently doing the math on it now. I believe this represents the 27th anniversary of John Woo not really making any movies that are really worth spending time or effort going to go see.
It's so sad. Because he was so influential and such a game changer with those early films. And it turned out that he was a little bit of a one-trick pony. And I know that's going to cop some flack from people, but he's kind of been shooting and reshooting the same things for a long, long time.
Look,
now,
I don't think,
as you point out.
No one's coming out to bat for Woo anymore, I don't think. Like, the last good movie I can see on here, like, admittedly, there's a lot of films I haven't seen, but a lot of films that I know didn't really get much talk, was Face Off in 1997. And maybe it's just the fact that when you make a movie as brilliant as Face Off, like, maybe there's just no way to go up from there.
That's what I mean. He hit the ground running. He was immediately a big deal. And I can assure you there are a whole lot of people who are looking at me like right now going, really? You're going to rag on The Killer? And I'm not ragging on the original Killer. It's a great, great film. But the remake is a poor, poor one.
Anyway, maybe go back and watch 1989's The Killer if you're going to be watching anything this weekend.
Exactly. Or the Michael Fassbender one. But anyway, I digress.
Well,
hey, which reminds me, I wanted to ask you, what else have you been watching?
Well, Simon, one of the things I've been watching is looking at my Netflix search engine as I searched for The Killer and noticed not one, not two, but 3 films called The Killer streaming right now on Netflix. You got last year's David Fincher film starring Michael Fassbender.
Yeah.
You've got The Killer, which is a Peacock film, which I didn't actually realize was on Netflix until you pointed it out this morning to me.
Who's in that one? What's that about?
Oh, that's the one we're talking about now.
Oh, okay, sure. Oh, sorry,
Yeah.
yes. I thought that was the other one. Okay.
Yeah, and then there's also a third film from 2017, which is about a reclusive Caballero who sets out to discover the fate of his gunman father and grows to be a feared assassin himself.
Ooh, I want to see that one. That sounds interesting.
It does look kind of cool. But anyway, there's 2 films called The Killer that I'm very keen to see, and then a third one I'll see out of obligation.
There you go.
But yeah, if you want to sit down for the afternoon, maybe 3 Killer movies back to back might be the way you want to do it.
Killers with Ashton Kutcher, wasn't he in something called Killers?
Yeah, but that's not on Netflix.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Let's move on.
I get back to my original question. What else have you been watching?
Okay, well, big week of TV for me. So I finally saw the finale of Presumed Innocent, which we talked about on the show about 8 weeks ago. Thereabouts. Held up pretty well. The thing is, I'd like to talk about it, but I feel that people are still discovering this program. It just made it into the US Nielsen charts for the first time last week. So I think word of mouth on this Apple TV Plus show is incredibly high. If you haven't watched Presumed Innocent, I think well worth a look. I'd only seen the first couple of episodes, as is my want, when I talked about the show all those many months ago. But, you know, each week they layered in a whole bunch of interesting cliffhangers in every episode. Performances just got stronger and stronger through the season. I think it absolutely deserved its 8-episode runtime. And, yeah, easily one of the most fun, engaging shows I've watched on TV all year.
2 quick points. A, I guess The Killer. Oh, well, the household guessed The Killer early on. It wasn't me, but I'll claim it. And B, liked but didn't love how it wrapped a few things up. Still quality television, agree with everything you said, but some moments I thought, that's a little bit, it sort of revealed its very pulpy origins as a sort of airport novel kind of story. But that's enjoyable in and of itself. So
yeah, I was going to say,
that's good.
Sorry, show me where the problem is with that.
That's it, exactly.
Okay, so a couple of other things. I've really briefly mentioned my interest in the TV show Evil. That had its very final episode ever yesterday. I watched it at 11:30 last night, and I'm a little tuckered out this morning as a result of it. Simon Foster, I don't want to ruin anything for people who haven't seen it yet, and I'm sure there are multitudes of folks still yet to check out the program. But I will say the show largely sticks to landing. I think there'll be some people frustrated with the ending, only in that when they made it, there was, the show's been cancelled, but there's very much the potential that we may see the show revived in some way. Just as the show had been cancelled, it suddenly got released onto Netflix the first 2 seasons and became a huge smash hit. There are so many people watching Evil now that the show has just been cancelled by Paramount Plus. So there is a lot of very quiet talk right now that we may see Evil come back in some form in the not too distant future. They've left the ending very open-ended. If anything, they actually set up a new status quo for the series going forward. I will say some elements of the finale feel a little bit rushed, but if the show comes back, that's not going to be a problem at all because those elements can be unwound and just turned into some TV gold.
Can I ask, how do they manage to leave elements open-ended and still provide a satisfactory closing for this season and the series as a whole?
Well, if I was going to do that, I would then be giving massive spoilers to what happens at the end, Simon.
But you assure me that that's what they achieve. That's how they did it.
I will say you that the series villain is disposed of in a way that allows him the potential to come back, but also if it never comes back, then you'd be like, oh, well, that's actually a fairly fitting, if awful, way that this guy's gone out. Okay, but then also there is, I can talk about this element of it because it's sort of the thematic, the plot that sort of drives the last couple of episodes, which is that the team that they work on where they're hired by the church to go out and resolve issues of potential possession or other evil type stuff that people are up to. The team's being dissolved, the church is shut down, the overall Catholic Church has shut down the local church that they were all working from, and so they're all unemployed. But at the end of the season, at the end of the episode, they are given a new lease on life.
Okay.
Yeah, would you say that?
Good to know. All right.
Yeah.
I'll
Anyway.
watch it. I promise I'll watch it one day and then I probably won't. But I've heard good things about it, mostly from you. But
fantastic sort of, not necessarily a plot twist, but certainly a plot evolution in the last few seconds that absolutely speaks to the show's interest in classic horror. If you think about things like Rosemary's Baby and other shows that is very much pulled from in the last couple of seasons.
Do you think that's an effort by those involved with the making of the show to get it picked up somewhere else? Are they putting in there to drive fan fervor?
I think it's more creating an open door so they can do it if given the opportunity. I don't think they're trying to stoke it, but also everyone who is making that show is very keen to see it continue on because I think it's been both creatively satisfying. As I said, I think this is a very good program, but I think that for everyone involved, they are keen to just keep it going for at least a few more years if they can.
Great, good. What else have you been watching?
Other things, something I talk about almost as much as Evil is Homicide: Life on the Street.
Yes, you do.
Big thing happened this week and there seems to be something very fitting in that these are major shows in my canon, okay, the shows that make me. And the same week that we said goodbye to Evil is the same week that Homicide re-entered our lives because the show is now streaming in the US on Peacock. Look, quietly using some internet magic, I've watched a few of the episodes of Peacock. I do have them at home. Like, I can watch them, without the need to be streaming them anywhere. But the versions that are streaming on Peacock, they have been juiced up for high definition streaming.
I think that word means what you think it means. But anyway, go on.
I didn't say jizzed up. I said juiced up, which I should have said juiced up. But, whatever, Simon.
You did throw the internet into quite a panic through the week. We were fascinated to see that you claim to be, through your Facebook page, at least what I saw, in Baltimore, Maryland. And I
that was
thought,
on Instagram.
And it played on Facebook as well. So I'm sort of, I was like, what is Dan traveling? And then I sort of half recognized Yaphet Kotto's face, one of the stars, and I read, he's doing his whole homicide thing. So very clever. Your followers, we were both quite stunned by it.
Well, I did get a phone call from my mum asking if I was in Baltimore, which I thought was interesting. But anyway, I will say the show, it looks fantastic. If you've seen the DVDs, which have been the best representation of the show up till now, they were incredibly grainy. It shot on some, very dated film that they didn't spend a lot of money sort of doing the work on for the DVD.
Footage. I love it.
It looked so grainy. The revamp, they've actually spent the money on it. It looks amazing. It's nowhere near as grainy as it was, but it still has a really good-looking aesthetic to it. I don't think people are going to be too upset by seeing what they've done to it. The only thing is that some of the music rights are definitely, they haven't gotten the clearances on them. So some of the really great music that used to exist in a series has been replaced by
Spice Girls?
Just cheap temp files, effectively, which is a bit sad, but, I think we can all live with it. If it gets Homicide back in our lives, then it's worth it.
And finally, what else have you been watching?
Yeah, got along to the IMAX and saw Alien Romulus.
Oh, exciting. You have been busy this week. For someone who went back and forth to Maryland, I'm very excited. I'm thrilled that you have got to see all these films and TV shows. What do you think of Alien at Romuli?
Couple of thoughts with Alien Romulus in that I think that there's a problem with the Alien movies, okay, as we get further away from the 80s, which is that it was certainly present in the first film, but definitely really a core narrative aspect of the second, which is the role of Weyland-Yutani, the corporation that seems to more or less sort of govern the future, okay? I don't know, it's clearly the Amazon of,
of deep space exploration.
Of deep space, yeah.
Yeah.
But anyway, they seem to control everything on Earth, they control everything in space. And fine, in the 80s when that was first really sort of hammered in with the Paul Reiser character whose name was Carter Burke, if memory serves, that was a core part of the thing. But it seems though the more these movies are going along and there's prequels and sequels, the less they seem to be really interested in that corporate side of the world. And this film tries to lean into it, but doesn't really do anything with that. And that to me just seemed like a huge lost opportunity in 2024, as broadly throughout the culture, there's a very big conversation happening with the role of corporations into day-to-day lives and the value that actually provides to people. Why not actually lean into that, considering that is a thematic idea at the very beginning of the film that they just do nothing with for the rest of the film?
I disagree.
I
I disagree with that. I thought and we're going to have a little bit of a spoiler here, so block your ears if you haven't seen it. But I thought that the Rook character, the android, who is very clearly a face of the company, and
no,
is
he gets established as the face of the company, but then he just falls into a standard villain role. It's like, well, how does he achieve his objective? We don't really see any sort of real criticism of the capitalist forces of Wayland Yutani. It's just this guy's trying to stop them. As I said, it gets introduced at the beginning, but they don't really do anything interesting with it as it goes on. It becomes standard villain stuff. The problem I have with the film broadly, though, is that for the first maybe half to 2/3, I think it holds together pretty well. But then at a certain point, all the interesting atmospherics of it just become very standard. Hey, let's just go and, count off as we kill this guy and this guy and this guy in particularly uninteresting ways. And the film, it just kind of falls flat. Like, it just sort of sets up really, interesting, nice aesthetics and just plot elements, and then just kind of falls apart.
I don't disagree that I don't think it's I don't think it's anywhere near the scariest or the most fear-inducing of the Alien.
It's in no way scary.
I didn't think it I thought it was much more about atmosphere and aesthetics rather than about the feeling. I think that the genuine fear and the genuine sort of tummy-tightening terror of what an alien is or what aliens are has gone from the franchise. We discussed this last week, is that I thought it found it kind of a balance between appeasing the old viewers like me and bringing a young new viewership in. I thought it got that right. And Fede Alvarez is a great director, but it's a little bit of a franchise running on fumes, although those fumes were pretty toxic in this one. We're pretty good. So I don't disagree with what you're saying.
My problem is I don't think he is a great director.
I think he's a great visualist, like in much the same way that Ridley Scott is a great visualist, but not a particularly great storyteller.
Yeah, I mean, I think he's a terrible storyteller. But I mean, the thing is, I've only seen this film and the first half of his Evil Dead.
Don't Breathe is a great film. It's a terrific film, and the Evil Dead remake is terrific as well. Yeah,
but I don't know. The entire experience just left me a bit cold. But what I really sort of enjoyed was getting along to the New Sydney IMAX to go and see that. It's the first time I've been to the IMAX here.
Wow.
Sorry, the new IMAX before it got pulled down and reconstituted.
And you love it, Steve. I've been going on about it for a long time now. Are you on the payroll as well?
Well, yes and no. So I really like the room that it's in. I found it interesting just in terms of the width of the screen. It didn't really seem that much bigger than a standard VMAX screen that you find. Some of the bigger VMAXs around Sydney. Okay, but certainly the height is really what kicked in. And what I found interesting watching the height of the screen was it reminded me a lot of using the Apple Vision Pro the other week when we were, and so like that kind of experience I thought was kind of fun. Worked really well for Alien. I was glad that I saw it that way. But where I'm maybe not necessarily a huge convert is it's a really pricey ticket to get into that IMAX.
It's a ridiculously pricey ticket. Having just bought my tickets to the opening night of Megalopoli, I am fully aware of the cost incurred of going to the IMAX. For years, I never paid for any movie tickets. I'm still not whenever I go to the local grindhouse. But the IMAX, I'm cashing out, and it's hitting the back pocket.
Yeah, good.
What do you mean good?
No, I'm saying it's about time that you joined the hoi polloi and actually had to pay to go see a movie.
It's impacting the income revenue I make off this podcast, significantly impacting it.
Simon, welcome to the 99%.
All right. Did you watch anything else? Is this segment can go any longer?
It can, because I also watched all, 4 days and 5 hours each day of the Democratic National Convention throughout the week.
Not. You watched all of it? Really?
Yeah. Well, I had it on while I was working, so I was watching and doing stuff at the same time. Watched it all. Really interesting in terms of the way that they, have you ever watched any of these things, Simon?
I watched big chunks of it over the last few days. Yeah, I find the whole... Yes. Anyway, go on. You tell me your points of view and then I'll weigh in.
Oh, well, what I just think is sort of interesting and something I hadn't really sort of fully appreciated until I heard a bit of commentary around it over the last few days is these events, which are clearly just made for television. They really are actually made for television in that back in the day, I'm going to say, I'm not quite sure exactly when the change happened, but I'm going to say it was maybe in the mid-'80s. The Democratic National Conventions took place often over weeks. Well, Democratic and Republican. that take place over a number of weeks, and it was all just like backroom conversations. It wasn't really made for public consumption.
Sure.
Like these are literally made for TV events, to the point where they always hold their votes, where every state offers their delegates in support of the candidate. Like that's just purely for show, because that actually happens in teleconference calls like about a week or two prior.
Yep.
Yeah,
it's all show business. I think the Democratic Party, and we're going to get a little bit into politics here, but I don't want to too much. It was the rousing moments and the inspired moments were certainly that. There was too much looking in the past. What really irks a huge section of the Republican base are the Hillary Clintons, the Nancy Pelosi's, and all these people who speak to the last few years. What they needed to do was look forward. And I think the moments where they did look forward, I think worked best for this convention and worked best for the broadcast as well. So,
what's interesting about these, Simon, is that there's probably two things to keep in mind here. So, first of all, what we're watching is the thing that's made for TV, but also because it's got such a strong viewership behind it, it's also made for the power brokers in the party. So people who have specific types of power or influence are able to get like their people to get like short little like 7 to 15-minute speeches on there. So there's a lot of internal party jockeying to get those people up there. But what you're also seeing is this was organized like months and months and months ago, but then reconstituted to fit the fact they've got a new party candidate.
Exactly.
So what we're actually seeing is the Joe Biden DNC events, but reconfigured to try to institute like a whole bunch of sort of new freshness to it. And I think for what they managed to achieve, I think it's actually fairly incredible. But also, you're never going to get away from a DNC where the former presidents in the current sort of constitution of the party, they're always going to be given a presence there. The Republicans don't have the former presidents because the former presidents want nothing to do with the current president, and the current president wants nothing to do with them. So they're not going to get the invite. But while it's still a party where there's a certain amount of respect given to those that came before, Joe Biden probably won't be given, a half-hour slot to be able to speak next time they come through, but also he'll still be given a position, or at least the opportunity to be on the stage waving, depending on how his health is by that point. Also, can I just ask a question? And you're probably not going to have an answer for this, and nor do I, but with the decline of TV viewership around the place, let's say that Kamala wins this election and, ends up running a second time through. Is this possibly going to be the last time that we see a DNC like on TV? Like we're looking at probably like 8 years until there's like another big event like this.
Well, there'd be a big Republican event, wouldn't there?
Well, probably.
So
but also, I mean, 4 years in the current media landscape, it's a pretty long time period.
Exactly. Yeah. The whole song and dance act. That'd be interesting.
I mean, I'm sure there will still be something on YouTube or, other platforms, but is this the last time we see it on TV in the way that we have? Maybe. Tough call. Good call. Wouldn't have a problem with that. It cost a lot of money that could have been spent better elsewhere. But hey, that is the modern political landscape. Well, actually, it's been the political landscape for a long time now. Actually, you know what? Just an interesting thing. You said a lot of money that could be spent elsewhere. Yeah. This is effectively the party being given over 4 nights on broadcast TV that will run across like 5 hours each night. Like that's, the amount of money spent to stage this thing is nothing compared to what that advertising opportunity is.
I know. But what are all the NCIS watchers going to do? That's a lot of time with no Law and Order, with no NCIS.
Yeah. But, if we think about the expense of staging this thing, it's actually nothing compared to the earned media bump that they get out of it.
Oh, I see the point you're making. Yeah.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's intermission time.
Now, as folks know, we put an intermission right into the middle of the podcast. Looks at time code. Look, we're going to keep this on pretty short. Hey, look, during the week, Phil Donahue died. Phil Donahue was a major figure on US television for quite a number of decades.
He was.
His peak really came maybe early-ish 80s, where they ended up saying goodbye to the Phil Donahue Show, which was the talk show that he had been hosting, and it was instead sort of rebirthed as Donahue. And it really was the first of what became a very dominant TV form through the 90s of the daytime talk show, where you had a panel conversation usually happening on the stage, a moderating host in the form of Phil Donahue in this instance.
Very issues-based in most instances.
Issues-based, and it would be the same issue throughout the course of the hour, and that have a studio audience where the host would throw to the studio audience and ask them questions that get involved in the show.
Yeah.
Phil Donahue's really the guy that kind of popularized this. Some lady named Oprah Winfrey, who you may have seen this week at the DNC. She was supporting the Democrats. Yeah, so Oprah comes along.
And you get a vote. Yeah.
Yeah. Oprah comes along, it gets big, and then everyone else comes along. Your Sally Jesse Raphael, guy named Jerry Springer.
Sure.
Your
Ricky
Geraldo's.
Lakes was in there as well. Your Geraldo, of course. Yeah, famously so. And it did run the gamut from the very serious sort of issues-based, social issues-based narratives that were early on in the talk show format to some kind of really Morton Downey style horrific episodes where, it was always geared towards someone punching one another, or did you have my little person baby, and all that sort of thing. So it's a whole thing that became synonymous with the era. It's not really around anymore. It's Kelly Clarkson.
Can I just interrupt? I like your phrasing of my little person baby.
Exactly.
Okay, as though it's mixing the two genres of, the paternity test, but then also TV talk shows' love of midgets.
I really try to avoid that word. But anyway, yes, good point. Now it's very much celebrity-based. The Kelly Clarksons and the Ellen DeGeneres are very much about the goofiness of having stars on doing crazy things and talking about their lives. But back then it was paternities and maternities and workplace issues and, I'm a stripper with a wooden leg sort of thing. And so it was they were fun times. They really were fun times.
Yeah. So very quickly, one thing that dawned on me as I was thinking about my sort of viewership of these programs, through the 90s, I watched a lot of these. I was a teenager who, anytime there was school holidays on, or, out of hours, I'd regularly throw on a Ricky Lake or occasionally an Oprah, but Ricky was probably the thing I probably watched the majority of. But when I was a kid, I watched a lot of Donahue. Yes. And I was really thinking about interrogating my experience watching Donahue. I kind of think that maybe he's one of the most influential people in my life, the more that I've been thinking about it. So when I started watching Donahue was at an age where kids start to, explore external media away from their family. So, questions about the way the world works. And so one of the ways I did that as a kid was watching a lot of Donahue. And it just dawned on me that if you think about Donahue with his politics, where he's, fairly liberal, but also approaches things maybe from a more sort of conservative mainstream sort of standpoint. I just think about the way that I approach a lot of issues, and it seems to be the same way that Phil Donahue really presented it on screen. Anyway, it just kind of just struck me as a little bit interesting as he was exploring the world and, exposing some interesting pockets of the way that people live. It was probably the right at the time as I was just trying to find out how people live in pockets outside of my own. Anyway, it just struck. I think it had a bigger imprint on me than I really ever appreciated.
The format soared in the hands of, and you've mentioned Oprah Winfrey, of course, Rosie O'Donnell had a huge format, kind of sunk to its lows.
Well, wasn't Rosie O'Donnell's more traditional sort of daytime talk show, more in a form of Ellen?
To a certain degree, yeah, you're absolutely right. But it all came crashing down.
Are you about to mention Steve Wilkos as one of the greats in the...
I wasn't. I was going to mention that it all came crashing down with the Jenny Jones hijack interview when the young man revealed that he had a crush on his high school buddy, and that led to a murder a few days later based on what was revealed on the show. So it all sort of fell apart at that point. But along the way, there was some positive.
I'm not sure if it actually did fall apart, though. I mean, Oprah was still a very big presence on TV for years and years afterwards.
It certainly went away from the hijack kind of TV sort of format that Jenny Jones was part of.
I actually don't know. I'm trying to think what year that actually took place. I want to say that's really late 90s. But I think that's roughly about the same time that Jerry Springer really became a big deal. It was kind of like a changing the guard.
Sure. Maury Povich as well was another name that sort of loved to sort of get down and dirty in the sewerage of television. So, it didn't disappear altogether. You're absolutely right.
Yeah, I mean, I think that maybe it had a bit of a... I think that time period where they always tried to provide a sheen of integrity to the programs, even though they're dealing some pretty mucky issues, I think that just disappeared. I think it became pretty shameless after that. So that's maybe where the shift happened.
Yeah, well, R.I.P. Phil Donahue. He was certainly an influential media figure for so many years, and as you say, impacted viewers in America and around the world with his brand of personality journalism, I guess you could call it.
Yeah. And also, I think that what gets lost with Donahue a little bit is we think about a lot of the trash that the daytime talk show sort of fell into. And I'm not going to suggest that Phil Donahue didn't trade in some of that trash as well, because he absolutely did.
Yep.
Like, he did, there was swinger parties and orgies and all sorts of stuff discussed on the regular on that program. Yeah. But also, he did do a lot of actual fairly important public affairs programming. So the most notable thing being in the early 80s, having some panel chats about like the still emerging AIDS crisis that was really starting to bubble along. I think it was just after like the term AIDS had really been coined that you had Phil Donahue on national television talking to people about the disease. Like, it was still something only being covered by gay press at that point. So
we mentioned last week that Kimmel, I think that was in last week's podcast, that Kimmel was fairly sure that the late night talk show would be all but gone over the next 10 years or so. Is there the Kelly Clarksons, and Ellen's gone now, but Kelly's sort of flying the flag for daytime talk. Is the daytime talk show format under that kind of threat? Will it disappear?
It's exactly the same, really.
Yeah.
If anything, I mean, I'm not sure if you're aware of this, but the Drew Barrymore show, because she hosts one of these nowadays, it's got renewed for season 6. Would you suggest that show has the same cultural cachet of any of those late night talk shows?
To a certain demographic, maybe, but not to any great extent. Not broadly. Yeah. I mean, the View is still around discussing issue-based sort of things. So
yeah, that's another thing entirely again. But
that's a different perspective, yeah.
Anyway, Simon,
right.
I think it's probably time to move on. Let's just get this thing done with. Let's play some games. Let's get into the House of Games.
Dan Barrett, I think you're in for a tough week this week, because these are questions that I have put a great deal of effort into with an asterisk. Which Oscar-winning actress is named a UNHCR? Oh, God, I should know what that stands for. United Nations Human and Civil Rights Goodwill Ambassador in Geneva on August 27, 2001.
This one is actually exceptionally easy, Simon. I believe we're talking about one former spouse of Brad Pitt, one daughter of the great dentist. The great dentist, John Voight.
Your political mentor.
Yeah. We are talking about Angelina Jolie.
Yes, we are. Angelina Jolie. August 28, 2017. Matt Vogel, not a name I was familiar with prior to researching this segment. Matt Vogel makes his debut as the voice of whom?
Well, as an amateur Muppetologist, Simon, I'm well familiar with the works of one Matt Vogel, and I think you'll find that just a couple of years before the passing of one Carol Spinney, Matt Vogel took on the role of one Big Bird.
That may be true. The answer I had was Kermit the Frog, but he probably took over several of the Muppet characters at that point. Can you verify that Matt Vogel is indeed the voice of Kermit the Frog?
I cannot. I'm sorry.
Okay.
Oh, God.
I'll go with my internet research, and you'll no doubt text me in a few hours' time telling me what an idiot I am for getting my questions wrong. August 30, 1966, the iconic US medical drama Dr. Kildare, starring the great Richard Chamberlain, ends after how many seasons on air? Now, I know you love your medical drama. You've just been binging ER these last few weeks. Surely you know of the Dr. Kildare and its impact on American television, but how many seasons did it actually run for?
Well, this is the question. So, I mean, I know that it wasn't like 1 or 2 seasons, and I know it wasn't like 12 seasons. I get the feeling it was a sort of healthy, like 4 or 5-ish sort of a run. I'm going to say 5.
All right, let's go with 5 then. Boy, you really did well this week. I thought they were harder, but yeah, no, good job. I don't think you'll get the birthday quizzes. Do the birthday quiz thing.
Okay, well, before we get to that, Simon,
there's more.
Some Muppet stuff.
Oh, good.
Okay, so Vogel is the current voice of Kermit.
Yes.
Okay, I don't have the date though, so I mean, presumably you've got the date, so I'm sure that's correct.
Yeah,
but in the same year,
2017, I just said it. Yep.
In the same year, he did take over as Big Bird as well. So
Okay.
You know, we've
So
got that.
I kind of got to give you that one as well. Geez, that's 3 out of 3.
Well, not really, because you did give a date, so you know,
Yeah.
we'll try. You know, it's a big no.
I
Steve
appreciate
Whitmire
it,
was probably the best known voice of Kermit after the passing of Jim Henson back in the day.
Very true.
But yeah, he got dismissed for reasons which I'm still not entirely clear what happened there.
Oh, yeah, all those Miss Piggy jokes probably.
I think it's because of not being popular. But anyway.
Maybe so.
Yeah.
Can we do the birthday quiz, please?
Yeah, sure.
No, not happy birthday. No, not that. Please, no, not happy birthday.
All right, good luck with this one. Now, you're going to require a very specific train of thought to get this. Pay attention. You ready?
Okay.
August 25, 1930, Sean Connery. August 26, 1980, Chris Pine. August 29, 1959, Rebecca De Mornay. And August 29, 1915, Ingrid Bergman. Now, get your train of thought exactly right, and you'll get this. The clues are all on the picture there. If you know that where those pictures are from, you'll get the answer. He's looking at the picture.
I'm looking at the picture. So
podcasting.
I've got no idea what Sean Connery's in there. Chris Pine, I believe, is in the film Unstoppable in that photo. Rebecca De Mornay, is that Hand That Rocks the Cradle?
No, it is not.
Oh. Oh,
man. You are on the right path with Unstoppable, the Chris Pine Denzel Washington film. Ingrid Bergman, in her later years, was in a film that is tied to that in some way.
Were they all on trains?
Dan Barrett, you magnificent bastard, you've got it. They're all in train movies. Well done.
Okay.
Okay, so in that top corner there, you'll see Sean Connery in The Great Train Robbery opposite Donald Sutherland.
Right.
Then you've got Chris Pine in Unstoppable with Denzel. Now, Ingrid Bergman was, I think she was Oscar nominated, maybe even won the Oscar for Murder on the Orient Express in 1976, I want to say.
In the photo here, she's wearing a lovely hat, so she could be catching a train.
It's a nice hat. And Rebecca De Mornay has a 2-train connection. She was in the film Runaway Train, which you see there with the aforementioned John Voight and Eric Roberts. She was also very famous for having sex with Tom Cruise on the Chicago L line in Risky Business. So it's just non-stop training today on screen watching. See what I did there when I mentioned train of thought? That was the little clue that I gave you. At the start. This is what I do. It's good podcasting. That's why we get all these good reviews.
Yeah, sure. Simon, you know what else makes for a good podcast? Knowing when to leave the end. Okay, so let's get out of here. Folks, this has been a Screen Watching podcast. Thank you very much for listening and / persevering. If people want to get in contact with us, you can find us on Facebook, apparently, which still exists. It is at Screen Watching Podcast. We're on Threads. We're on YouTube. Look for us at Screen Watching. If you want to hit us up on the email, the screenwatchingpodcast@gmail.com. If you want to find Simon, he's still on the internet at Screenspace, which is screen-space.net. You can find me at alwaysbewatching.com. There you can find my newsletter, which comes out 5 days a week with all the news and information about TV and streaming. And then I also got some bonus interviews that come out and a TV guide called Always Be Streaming. Folks, there's a lot of content beyond this podcast. Can you believe it?
We had a busy week this week. There was lots to talk about. Remember how last week I mentioned I was going to release the program for my Sydney Science Fiction Film Festival? Well, I didn't. It's going out this week, and I will send you those films, and people can look at the Event Cinemas website as from Monday and buy their tickets for my upcoming sci-fi film event here in Sydney, if you're Sydney bound. So thank you, everyone. Thanks for listening. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.